Black Creek, Texas, 1887. Heat shimmered above the hard-packed street, and the boards along the dry goods store had already gone pale beneath the sun. Jane Reed stood with her back against that wall, a traveling bag held tight against her chest, while 3 men closed around her without raising their voices. That silence was worse than shouting. Hank Dale held a folded warrant in one hand. $400. Dead or alive? Jane looked at the paper, then at him. I have never been to Missouri. Hank's face did not change. The paper says you have. At the far end of the street, 2 more men waited in the shade. One of them was young, restless, his hand hanging too close to his revolver. Tom Finn. Cole Hart had come into Black Creek wanting water for his horse, food for himself, and nothing from the town that could follow him west. He stopped outside the livery when he heard Jane's voice. She was afraid. He could see it in the way her fingers tightened around the bag. But she would not give those men the pleasure of seeing her break. Cole should have kept walking. Instead, he crossed the street. The men noticed him one by one. No one reached for a gun. Not yet. Cole looked at Jane first, then at the folded paper. Let me see it. Hank gave a short laugh. This doesn't concern you. Cole held out his hand. For a long moment, only the wind moved, carrying dust between their boots and rattling a loose strip of tin above the alley. Then Hank handed him the warrant. Cole read every line. A robbery in Missouri, a sheriff's authority. Jane Reed named as an accomplice. $400 attached to her life. The paper looked official. That was what made it dangerous. Cole folded it once and gave it back. You don't have what you need to drag her out of Texas today. Hank's eyes hardened. Jane turned toward Cole, not grateful, not relieved, only measuring the stranger who had just stepped into a fight that was not his. Cole could still leave. He knew it. Hank knew it too. Then Hank glanced past him toward the end of the street. There are 5 of us. Cole followed his eyes. 2 men stood beyond the dust watching, and the younger one, Tom Finn, slowly rested his hand on the butt of his gun. Cole did not draw his gun. He handed the warrant back to Hank Dale and looked at Jane instead. Walk with me. For half a second she stayed against the wall. Then she pushed away from the boards and stepped past the 3 men. Hank let her go. That bothered Cole more than if he had tried to stop them. Men who believed they had already won could afford to be patient. They crossed the street without hurrying. Behind them, no boots followed. No one called out. But Cole could feel 5 sets of eyes measuring the distance. He took Jane into the front room of a small boarding house and chose a table where he could see both the door and the window. Jane set her bag beside her chair. She still had not thanked him. Cole liked that. Gratitude could wait. Truth could not. There are 2 more, she said. I saw them watching this place before sunrise. Cole nodded once. That made 5. He rested his forearms on the table. Start with Missouri. Jane looked down at her hands. 8 months earlier, her husband, Frank Reed, had disappeared west. He had taken their savings. He had taken the horse. He had left Jane with Reed Place and whatever work she could manage alone. 3 weeks ago, a letter arrived from Missouri. Frank had been arrested after a bank robbery. The sheriff handling the case was Roy Voss. Frank had been facing years in prison. Then he gave them Jane's name. Not as his wife, as an accomplice. Cole watched her as she said it. No tears, no shaking voice. Only one thumb pressing slowly against the edge of her palm. He said I helped him? He said enough, and it bought him something. Jane looked up. 2 years instead of 10. The room seemed quieter after that. Outside, a wagon wheel struck a rut and wood cracked against iron. Jane did not move. Cole had seen betrayal before. Usually it came with shouting. This kind was colder. Frank had not only abandoned her, he had turned her name into currency. Cole leaned back. 5 men for a woman with no criminal record. Jane's eyes narrowed slightly. You think the warrant is false? I think it may be useful to someone. That answer changed something in her face. Not trust, not yet, but attention. Cole looked toward the window. One of the men from the street was still there, waiting. Then Cole asked the question that mattered more than Missouri. "What do you own?" Jane held his gaze. 40 acres. A pause. Along Black Creek. Cole said nothing for several seconds. Then he asked, "Did Frank ever try to sell it?" Jane's expression hardened. "Twice?" Cole did not ask Jane why she had refused to sell. Not at first. He let the silence sit between them until the noise from the street returned through the walls. A wagon creaked past. Somewhere farther down, a hammer struck iron. Jane kept her eyes on him. 40 acres, Cole said. 40. And Black Creek touches the property. It runs along the south edge. That explained more than the warrant had. 40 acres was not much by Texas standards. But land beside reliable water could feed stock, carry a garden through dry months, and keep a family from depending on a neighbor's well. Jane folded her hands on the table. "My father left it to me." Cole looked at her. She did not offer more than that. She did not need to. The way she said the words made clear that Reed Place had existed in her life before Frank Reed had, and that losing it would mean losing something older than a marriage already gone bad. "Frank wanted to sell? Twice? And you stopped him. It was mine to keep." There was no pride in the answer, only certainty. Cole glanced toward the window. The man across the street had moved into the shade, but he had not left. A legal accusation from Missouri, 5 armed men, a husband willing to trade his wife's name for a shorter sentence, and 40 acres touching Black Creek. The pieces were beginning to fit too neatly. Jane watched him think. "What are you not saying?" Cole looked back at her. "I'm saying 5 men did not ride this far because a sheriff suddenly became interested in justice." Jane's jaw tightened. He could see the thought reaching her before she spoke it. The land. Maybe. Not maybe. Her voice was low now. Frank had tried to sell Reed Place before he ran. Now, after he was arrested, a warrant had appeared with her name on it. Cole stood. Jane's eyes followed him. "Where are you going?" "And to ask the question someone in this town already knows the answer to." He stepped into the sunlight. The heat pressed down hard enough to flatten sound. Across the street, the watcher shifted his weight. Cole ignored him and walked toward the telegraph office. Inside, Eli Moss sat behind the counter, working the key with 2 fingers. Cole waited until the clicking stopped. Then he said one name, Roy Voss. Eli's hand froze above the key. For the first time that morning, Cole saw fear arrive before a man had time to hide it. Eli Moss lowered his hand from the telegraph key. He did not ask Cole to repeat the name. That told Cole enough to stay. Outside, Black Creek went on with its morning. Boots crossed the boardwalk. A horse stamped against a hitch rail. Inside the office, the only sound was the small metallic tick of the telegraph settling after use. "You know him?" Cole said. Eli looked toward the front window. "I know the name." Cole rested one hand on the counter. "I'm not asking for gossip." "No," Eli said. "You're asking how much trouble comes with it?" Cole waited. Eli finally leaned back. "Roy Voss is a sheriff in Missouri." "A real one?" "As real as the seal on that warrant." That was the answer Cole had expected and still disliked hearing. A forged paper could be exposed. A real badge used for the wrong purpose was harder. Eli kept his voice low. He had heard of landowners being pressed through debts, disputes, criminal accusations, anything that could make a frightened person sell before the law finished sorting truth from pressure. The pattern was never exactly the same. That was what kept it from looking like a pattern, but the result often was property changed hands. The trouble disappeared. Cole thought of Jane saying Frank had tried twice to sell Reed Place. "Land with water?" he asked. Eli's eyes lifted. "Usually worth more trouble." That was close enough to an answer. Cole looked through the window toward the street. If Voss wanted Jane arrested, one man could have carried the paper. Eli said nothing. 5 means they expect resistance, or they expect someone to be frightened before resistance becomes necessary. Cole turned that over. It was cleaner than murder. Put enough law around a threat, and decent people might surrender before realizing they had been robbed. Does Voss work alone? I didn't say he worked at all. Eli's caution was deliberate. Cole respected it. You've said enough. He started toward the door. Behind him, Eli spoke once more. Mr. Hart? Cole stopped. If you're thinking about helping that woman, remember something. Cole looked back. Men like Voss don't need everyone to believe them. Eli's eyes moved toward the window. They only need the right people to hesitate. Cole followed his gaze. A tall man stood across the street in a dark coat, still despite the heat, older than the others, calm, watching the telegraph office as if he had known exactly where Cole would go. Cole had never seen him before. He did not need an introduction. Silas Kane had arrived. Silas Kane did not cross the street. He only watched Cole step out of the telegraph office, then turned and walked away, as if the meeting had already been arranged. Cole let him go. Following too quickly would only tell Silas what he wanted to know. Instead, Cole spent the next hour learning where the 5 men had planted themselves around Black Creek. Hank Dale and 2 others sat near the saloon, close enough to see the boarding house without pretending to drink. A 4th man stood under the barber shop awning, his attention fixed on the same doorway. Tom Finn was at the livery. He stood beside Cole's horse, not touching the reins, not reaching for the saddle, just standing there. Cole walked into the shade and checked the animal slowly. Tom watched every movement. The man who threatens a horse, Cole said, usually ran out of better arguments. Tom's hand drifted toward his revolver. Not a draw. A reminder. Silas Kane wants a word. When? End of the street. Tom glanced toward the sun. Soon. Cole finished checking the cinch and walked out without answering. Back at the boarding house, Jane was standing at the window. She had seen enough movement outside to understand the town had changed around her. They're closing in. Cole nodded. 5 men can cover a small town without looking like an army. Jane turned from the window. Then I should leave before they make it impossible. Cole did not tell her what to do. If you run now, they'll use it. For what? To make you look like the woman on that paper. Jane looked toward the street. The choice sat there between them. Leave and risk confirming the story Roy Voss had built. Stay and remain inside reach of 5 armed men. Cole could see fear in the tightness around her mouth. But fear was not the same as surrender. My father kept Reed Place through dry years when everyone told him to move on. She picked up her bag and set it farther from the door. I'm staying. Cole gave one small nod. It was her decision. That mattered. Jane studied him. And what are you doing? Cole looked toward the end of the street. Silas Kane was waiting there now, alone in the open. I'm going to hear what he thinks he can buy. Jane held his eyes a moment longer. Then she said, Don't let him decide the price. Cole stepped outside. By the time he reached the street, every man in Silas Kane's crew had stopped pretending not to watch. Silas Kane waited where the buildings thinned and the street opened toward dry country. He had taken off his coat despite the heat and folded it over one arm. Nothing about him looked hurried. That made Cole more careful. 4 men were spread behind him at distances too, even to be accidental. Tom Finn stood farthest left, restless already. Silas looked at Cole's empty hands. You've made this harder than it needs to be. Cole stopped several paces away. That depends what you came here to do. We came to collect on a lawful warrant. Then, take it through the proper authorities. Silas's mouth tightened. We can get what we need. Maybe. Cole kept his voice level. But you don't have it today. The wind pushed dust across the space between them. Silas glanced toward the town. You could ride out now. There was no threat in the words. That was what made them dangerous. No one here knows you, Silas continued. No family, no land, no reason to bleed for a woman you met this morning. Cole felt the truth of it. His horse was saddled. The western road was open. An hour from now, Black Creek could be behind him. That had been the plan before he heard Jane's voice in the alley. Cole looked at Silas. $400 isn't enough to bring 5 men this far for one woman. Silas said nothing. Roy Voss has another reason. Still nothing. Reed Place. For the first time, something shifted behind Silas's eyes. Small, but there. Cole continued. 40 acres on Black Creek. Frank tried to sell it. Jane refused. Then Frank gets arrested, gives Voss her name, and suddenly 5 men arrive with paper clean enough to scare her off. Silas's expression hardened. You're building a story. No. Cole looked past him at the other men. I'm reading one. Silas lowered his voice. Last chance, Hart. Cole heard a horse stamp somewhere behind him. A shutter knocked once against a wall. He thought of Jane moving her bag away from the boarding house door. She had chosen to stay. Now the same choice stood in front of him. He could still leave. He could still become the man who had only stopped for water. Silas nodded toward the western road. Ride. Cole did not move. Something settled then. Not courage, not certainty. Only the knowledge that if he turned away now, he would know exactly what he had left behind. No. Silas's eyes shifted, not toward Cole, slightly left. Cole followed the movement. Tom Finn's hand was already closing around his revolver. Tom Finn cleared leather before Silas Kane could say another word. Cole had been watching the boy's hand since the livery. Too restless, too eager to prove he belonged among older men. That gave Cole half a heartbeat, nothing more. Tom fired first. The shot tore past Cole's right shoulder and struck wood behind him. Cole answered once. Tom went down hard, clutching his leg, his revolver skidding into the dust. For 1 second, no one moved. Then Silas drew. He was faster than Cole expected. Not young fast. Experienced fast. The kind of speed built from years of knowing exactly how little motion a gun required. Cole turned as the shot broke. Fire ripped across the outside of his left arm near the shoulder. His hand went numb for a moment. Warm blood ran beneath his sleeve. Silas fired again. Cole stepped sideways and shot low. The bullet struck Silas's revolver and spun it from his hand. Silas stared at the empty space beside his fingers. Cole's second shot passed through the crown of his hat, not his head. The message was deliberate. Silas stopped reaching. Behind him, the remaining men shifted. Hank Dale swore under his breath. One of the others looked toward Tom, who was pale now and breathing through clenched teeth. Cole's left arm was beginning to throb. He could feel strength leaving it. The street no longer seemed wide. It seemed narrow enough for one mistake to kill someone. Then Jane appeared near the boarding house entrance. She had not run. Cole saw her only for an instant, but it was enough. Her face was pale. Her hands were empty. She stood where everyone could see her. The woman on the warrant, the woman they had expected to frighten out of town. Still there. Silas saw her too. Something changed in his expression. Not defeat. Calculation. One of his men on the right lowered his hand toward his holster. Cole turned slightly. Too slowly this time. His wounded arm dragged against him. The man saw it. So did Hank. So did Jane. Tom groaned in the dust. No one spoke. The whole street seemed to hold its breath around the next movement. And then the man on the right made his choice. The man's fingers touched the butt of his revolver. Before he could draw, Cole's horse jerked against the loose hitch rail behind him. The gunfire had unsettled the animal. It pulled free and lunged sideways into the street, hooves striking hard-packed dirt, forcing the 2 men on the right to break their stance. It was not bravery, it was confusion. But confusion was enough. One man stumbled back, the other threw up both hands. Hank Dale looked from Tom bleeding in the dust to Silas standing empty-handed. Then to Cole, whose left sleeve was darkening by the second. Hank slowly raised his hands. The fight ended without anyone looking victorious. Smoke drifted between the buildings. A spent casing lay near Cole's boot. Tom was trying not to cry out. Silas Kane said nothing. Marshal Jack Boone stepped from the shade of his office only after every visible hand was clear of a weapon. He had watched enough to know who fired first. Cole lowered his revolver. The movement hurt worse than drawing it had. Jack's eyes went to the blood. "Put it away before you fall down." Cole obeyed. Then he told him everything. Frank Reed, the Missouri robbery. Roy Voss, the warrant. Reed Place, Black Creek. The pattern Eli Moss had described. Jack listened without interrupting. When Cole finished, he looked at Jane. Not Cole. Jane stepped forward. Her voice was steady. She told Jack that Frank had tried twice to sell her land, that she had refused, that she had never been to Missouri, that the men had come for her anyway. For the first time that day, the story belonged to her in front of the law. Jack turned to Silas. "You got anything to add?" Silas stared at him and kept silent. Jack nodded once. "That'll do." He ordered the 5 men held while he verified the papers and the shooting. Tom would get a doctor first. Then Jack sent for Eli Moss. Telegrams would go out before sundown, not because one gunfight had solved anything, because now there were witnesses. Names, a wounded man, a local marshal, and a record Roy Voss could not quietly erase. Jack looked at Cole's arm again. "You won the street." Then he looked toward Jane. "Now we find out whether paper wins the rest." Cole followed his gaze. Jane was still standing in the open, still on her own feet. But the warrant had not disappeared, and neither had the man who had put her name on it. By the time the doctor finished with Cole, the street outside had gone quiet. 7 stitches closed the cut along his upper arm. The bullet had passed shallow enough to spare the bone, but every movement pulled at the thread beneath the bandage. Cole sat on the edge of the table while the doctor washed blood from his hands. No one called him brave. No one needed to. Tom Finn was being treated in the next room. The boy would keep his leg if infection stayed away. That mattered more than anything Cole could say about the shooting. Near sundown, Jane found him at the livery. She carried 2 cups of coffee. Cole was tightening a strap one-handed when she set 1 cup beside him. "You should leave that alone." "I've heard that before." "Did you listen then?" No. For the first time that day, the corner of her mouth almost moved. Almost. They sat on a hay bale near the open doors while the last light settled across Black Creek. Jane did not thank him, not directly. Instead, she told him about Reed Place. Her father had taken hold of those 40 acres years before, when the creek ran narrow in summer and the winters came hard enough to kill weak cattle. He had stayed through drought, sickness, and bad seasons because he believed land only became a home after a person had paid enough to keep it. Cole listened without interrupting. After a while, Jane looked at his bandaged arm. "You paid for mine today." Cole shook his head. "I paid for my choice." The distinction mattered to both of them. Jack Boone had already sent telegrams through Eli Moss. One went east for verification. Another went to authorities who had been hearing Roy Voss's name for longer than anyone in Black Creek knew. Nothing would be settled that night. The warrant still existed. Roy was still somewhere beyond Texas. Frank was still alive in Missouri, with 2 fewer years to serve because he had sold his wife's name. Jane wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "So tomorrow I go back to Reed Place." Cole looked at her. "That's what you want?" "It's what I'm doing." He nodded. No advice, no warning, just acceptance. The silence between them changed after that. Not softer, closer. Jane finally asked the question she had been holding. "Where do you go when this is over?" Cole looked through the livery doors toward the darkening road. "West?" Jane lowered her eyes to the coffee, and neither of them pretended the answer meant nothing. 3 weeks later, Roy Voss was no longer wearing a sheriff's badge. Jack Boone received the confirmation by telegram. Voss had resigned 2 days after the shooting in Black Creek and disappeared before questions around his warrants could reach him. No one knew where he had gone. Silas Kane remained in custody while the law untangled what could be proven. Hank Dale talked little. Tom Finn kept his leg. And Frank Reed remained in Missouri, serving the sentence he had shortened by giving away someone else's name. None of it felt like victory. Too much had already been taken. Trust, blood, years Jane would never get back. Cole stayed only long enough for the doctor to remove the worst of the bandaging and warn him not to tear the stitches open. On his last morning, Black Creek slept when he saddled his horse. Jane was not at the livery. He had not asked her to come. Some goodbyes grew smaller when spoken aloud. He rode west as the sun climbed behind him. The road stretched pale and empty through the morning heat. After 2 hours, the wound began to ache beneath his shirt. Cole touched it once and let his hand fall. The scar would remain, not because he had won a gunfight, because there had been one moment when he could have ridden away clean and chose not to. Back at Reed Place, Jane walked the south edge of her 40 acres. Black Creek moved beside her, low but steady. She checked the fence line, looked over the ground her father had kept, then stopped where the water curved past a stand of cottonwoods. 3 weeks earlier, 5 men had arrived, with $400 attached to her name. Frank had tried to trade away her freedom. Roy Voss had tried to make theft look legal. Silas Kane had tried to make fear do the rest. The land was still hers. That did not repair the marriage. It did not erase the warrant. It did not put Cole Hart beside her. But it gave Jane something more honest than a perfect ending. She still had the right to choose what happened next. At the beginning, she had stood with her back against a wall while armed men closed around her. Now there was no wall behind her, only 40 acres, running water, open sky, and work waiting for her hands. Far to the west, Cole kept riding. Jane turned toward the house. Neither looked back, but both carried Black Creek with them, a place where one woman refused to be erased. And one man discovered that leaving unchanged was no longer possible. Thank you for staying with Jane and Cole all the way to the end of Black Creek. If this story of courage, sacrifice, justice, and the quiet strength to keep standing meant something to you, please subscribe and join us for more Western romance and frontier survival stories. And tell us in the comments, would you have stayed to defend Reed Place or ridden away while you still had the chance? Until the next trail opens, thank you for watching, and may every hard road lead you somewhere worth holding on to. Disclaimer: this is a fictional Western romance story inspired by life on the 19th century American frontier. Characters, events, dialogue, and dramatic situations are created for storytelling purposes. Historical settings and cultural details are researched for authenticity.